everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I think it's about time that I talked about Love and Gelato, both the book and the movie, because I watched them last week, I think. Well, at least when I'm recording this. I can't quite remember when I watched it. Let me check my Goodreads. I read the book from July 10th to July 12th, and I believe I started watching it on July 12th and then finished it up on July 13th. If you want to check out my Goodreads review or my Storygraph review for Love and Gelato, the book, both of those are linked down below in the description. But overall, I really enjoyed the book. I absolutely loved it, which was a pleasant surprise for me. Okay guys, before I continue, I want to say the following. If you do not like spoilers, do not continue with this video. If you want to watch this video, just continue at your own risk. Because I said it in the title of this video, I said it in the description, and I'm saying it right now, this video will have spoilers. And those spoilers will mostly focus on the differences between the book and the movie. But they will still be spoilers if you haven't watched the movie, if you haven't read the book. Continue with this video at your own risk. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the book Love and Gelato. This part is not as spoiler heavy. I'm just going to talk about my general thoughts about it. As I said, the links to my Goodreads and my Storygraph are linked down below in the comments. So if you want to go read my review for this book, you can go to either Storygraph or Goodreads. It's the same review. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and as I explained in my review for this book, it felt like it was definitely 4 stars, but it didn't feel quite as high as 5 stars. But I couldn't decide if I wanted to do 4.25 stars or 4.5 stars or 4.75 stars. I couldn't decide on what fraction to give it, so I just settled on 4 stars because I knew it was somewhere in that middle ground, but I just could not decide for the life of me. The main reason why I picked this book up is because I'm really looking forward to Love and Luck and Love and Olives. I found out that this was the first book in the series, and even though it's not a traditional series in the sense of like this is one part of the story, the second book is the second part, the third book's the third part of the story, it's not a traditional series in that sense. But I read this book first because if I was disappointed in this book, then I knew to borrow Love and Luck and Love and Olives before actually buying them. I really enjoyed this book, and as I think I said at the beginning of this video, I was surprised with how much I enjoyed this book because contemporary is just not usually my genre, romance not usually my genre. Because when I'm reading, I really want to be like swept away. So I tend to read fantasy, historical fiction, something that will take me away from the current set of times. That's why I was really surprised by Love and Gelato, because I was 100%, if not 1000%, expecting this to solely be love. Because that's what's in the title. But for this, it's not just about like the romantic love between two romantic partners. It's about the love of a mother and a daughter, about the love of a father and a daughter, and it's not just the romantic love, which is something that I really appreciated in this book. Let's move on to the movie. It came out June of this year, June 2022. I think June 22nd, 2022. I'll admit, I watched the trailer when I was no more than halfway through the book, and by this point in the book, I was loving it, I was invested, and that's a good sign. And when I watched the trailer, I was nervous because it didn't seem fully like the book, and I really try not to compare the book to the movie, and something that I noticed helped me was taking notes as I watched the movie. Before we dive into this section, I will remind you all that this section is the spoiler heavy section. Last section, like when I was just talking about the book, that had no spoilers, but this will have spoilers. I'm not going to mention when I'm about to say a spoiler. No on-screen warning is going to happen. With all that said, let's start talking about the movie. Carolina, or Lena as she prefers to go by, her mother Hadley dies from pancreatic cancer basically by the time the book starts. And in the book, all Hadley tells Lena is to go to Italy to meet Howard and to just enjoy her time there, because that's where her life was changed. But in the movie, it's set up that Lena and Hadley are going to go to Rome on a graduation present trip for Lena. And Lena's mother dies, and Hadley's living wish, as she called it, was for Lena to still go to Rome, to still enjoy her time in Italy. Just a little side note that was different. It was a big difference, but it didn't have an impact on the actual movie. In the book, Lena goes to Florence and is basically living at the cemetery with Howard, who works at the cemetery, and his co-worker, his colleague Sonia, and they're living at the cemetery in Florence. And Lena's biological dad, which I'll talk about a bit later, is in Rome. In the movie, they switched it up so that Lena actually goes to live with Francesca, one of Hadley's friends from her time in Italy. They live in Rome. Howard's a professor in Rome. And Lena's biological father is in Florence. The cities are switched up, and who Lena lives with is changed, but it doesn't have like that big of an impact. Except Lena living with Francesca does have a little bit of an impact on how the story flows, which I think works for the movie, but the city swap didn't have a big impact on the actual story. And Lena's best friend, Addie, who's the main character for Love and Luck, I believe, Lena wanted Addie to come with her to Italy. Hadley said, no, you need to do this on your own. Once Lena gets there, Francesca picks her up, and a small difference, which I actually liked and think worked for the movie and worked a bit better in the story, was that Lena did know Italian. She took AP Italian in high school, and I think that worked well in the movie, because something you really don't want to do is go to a country where you don't know the language or you didn't try to learn the language. Even if you know someone who knows the language, like, there's no guarantee that you'll be with them 24/7. There's no guarantee that the city you're in or town you're in will know English or will have a lot of English speakers. And even then, like, there's no guarantee that they'll know good English and that you'll be able to have a full-on conversation with them. So that is something that I think worked in the movie, because in the book, there's no indication that Lena knows Italian. Something that confused me about the movie, though, was that Francesca and Howard are cousins. It didn't have that big of an effect on the movie, aside from explaining why they're with each other a lot, but it just confused me, because in the book they were just friends through the college that they were at, through the university they were at, and that's how they also met Hadley, Lena's mom. That was just a little movie plot note that just confused me, because they could have just been friends. Like, just let us have our male-female platonic relationships where they're friends. In the book, Lena lived at the cemetery with Howard. In the movie, she lives with Francesca. And part of me was super bummed that we didn't get the cemetery. But again, not a big impact on the storyline. I loved the soundtrack of this movie. Like, I've tried looking everywhere for the soundtrack. So if you could mention in the comment where I can get the soundtrack, please let me know, because I would love the soundtrack. Also, something that like threw me off a little bit was Alessandro, who I can't quite remember if he was an actual character in the book. Part of me doesn't think he was, or at the very least he was a minor character in the book. In the movie, he basically becomes the love interest rival love interest to our main love interest, Lorenzo. Forgot his name for a second. Alessandro basically takes the place of Thomas, who was in the book and an English boy going to the school that they were all going to. Alessandro being the replacement love interest for Thomas threw me off, because I kind of wanted to see the possible little love interest in an English boy in Italy. Like, I feel like that would have been cute, even though, like, you kind of do know that she ends up with Lorenzo at the end. I would have liked to see that, where it's like, oh, English boy in Italy. A lot of these, like, as I was taking notes and as I'm looking at my notes, like, I kind of did notice that it's not that they weren't plot points, they just weren't major plot changers from the book to the screen. Like, another example of this is Francesca having the journal instead of Howard. Or Sonia, like in the book, Sonia has the journal and she thought that Hadley sent it for Howard, but then once Lena got there, she was like, oh, it was meant for Lena. And then in the, like, after Lena finishes it, in the book at least, She gives it to Howard thinking it actually was meant for Howard, because at the beginning, like, of the journal, in the book at least, she says, I made the wrong choice. And then by the end of it, it's like Howard was the right choice. And her professor, her photography professor, Matteo Rossi, in the book was the wrong choice. And this was an explanation as to why he was the wrong choice and why Howard was the right choice. And that was actually something that I missed from the book, because in the book, you basically find out that Howard knew all along that Lena was not his daughter, that she was most likely Matteo Rossi's daughter, the photography professor's daughter. And he still acted like he was her father. He still treated her like she was his daughter. Something that bothered me, I kind of started to hint at it when I mentioned Alessandro being the new romantic rival instead of Thomas. There were a couple of characters, two that I distinctly remember, and there might have been some side characters that weren't Italian, but Thomas was English and Mimi was Swedish. And Mimi was Lorenzo's initial love interest, and he had been pining over her for 2 years. And in the book, they sort of start dating. It's not really like, Lorenzo doesn't really clarify if they're actually dating or not, but it's sort of hinted at that they are pretty much dating. In the movie, as I mentioned, Alessandro, an Italian boy, basically replaces Thomas, and Giorgio replaces Mimi, and they're both Italian. And I don't want, like, it's not a big deal because it's basically Europe, and they're all like, most of the characters were initially all European. So it's like just the fact that they switched like Thomas from an English boy to an Italian boy, and Mimi from a Swedish girl to an Italian girl. Not that big of a deal, but on that note, it was nice seeing Addie being portrayed by a black girl. That's something that I did appreciate and that I did like. But moving on to Lena learning about her mother's time in Italy, it disappointed me that we didn't have like the shocking first line in the journal of, I made the wrong choice. Like, what was the wrong choice? And the fact that we don't necessarily have that in the movie was a disappointment, but again, not necessarily a big plot point. And like in the book, Lena thinks that Howard's her dad initially. And in the movie, when she's out at like lunch with Howard and Francesca and Lorenzo and his family, she basically says like, what's up with this? The guy who was my dad doesn't show up in the picture for 18 years and now all of a sudden is like trying to be my dad, or like something along those lines. And she storms off because Giorgio was being a brat. I did not like Georgia in the movie. She was better in the book as Mimi. I did not like Georgia. Howard follows after her and basically says, I'm not your dad. Our photography professor at the time, Matteo Fossi, is your dad. Lena goes to Florence to meet Matteo. He just refuses to meet her. And Lena sees a picture of herself that Hadley took. Hadley was a photographer. And Lena sees this picture of herself. It's really interesting because Matteo Fossi's gallery in the movie, it's just so meh and bland. Like, it's a black and white gallery, which is like, okay, that can be very interesting, but just the way his is, at least for me, was just very meh and bland, and there was nothing really eye-catching about it aside from the picture of Lena, which she took, which was great. Something that I really enjoyed was that Lorenzo cooked and he baked, and I was just like, yay, we love a guy who cooks and bakes. I love cooking and baking. And just the fact that we have a male character cooking and baking and enjoying it, it's like, yay. And near the end of the movie, when Lena is thinking about leaving, Howard brings Addie into the picture, like brings her to Italy. And I loved that because that was something that I noticed in the movie, was that Addie ends up in Italy. And Lorenzo and Lena were so cute in the end. And I liked that they didn't necessarily end up an official couple at the end of the movie because, again, we like the slow burn. I like the slow burn stuff. That's all I'm going to talk about movie-wise because I don't want to give too much away. But I absolutely loved this movie, and I loved how it did take some creative license apart from the book. And it was a really nice coming-of-age movie with like a side of romance. I honestly think it was an amazing movie, and I definitely recommend reading the book, watching the movie. You don't necessarily need to read the book before watching the movie. I know that's so sacrilegious to say. The movie and the book are so similar but so different that it doesn't really matter in my opinion. As usual, my socials are linked down in the description below, as well as my Goodreads, my Storygraph, my Mercari, and my Pango books. Thank you all for watching and stay tuned for next week's video.